If you came and offered me $100 million to work and tell me that I need to travel 300 days a year and work 80 hours a week, I would say absolutely not.
How did you make that decision?
Sahil Bloom.
One of the world's most successful writers who's amassed millions of followers in just the last few years.
Former investment banker managing over $2.5 billion in his 20s.
Debut author of an upcoming book called The 5 Types of Wealth.
That's why the book is called The 5 Types of Wealth, right? But time is probably one of the most significant ones.
When you think about your time, thinking about it in the context of something that you can actually manipulate and use in the right ways, but one that most people never think about.
Just based on society, they think it's capital.
Think about your time, what it means, because if you don't, society will just choose for you.
Sahil, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, man. So we were talking a little bit off air, but I want to start off with a quote by Miyamoto Musashi by the Book of Five Rings. And he has a quote that says, "Once you know it broadly, you will see it in everything." And I love that quote because I take that as once you are a master at something, you can apply those principles in pretty much every other industry. One of the things that I feel you have a lot of experience with back in your private equity experience, there must have been some principles that you may have learned that applies to you in business, in life, in dealings with people. What are some of the lessons that you've learned through your experience as the VP of a PE firm back in your day, and how are you applying those lessons?
It's a great question. I love that quote too. I need to write that down. I would say the biggest one, maybe this is a pun intended, is to take the small things seriously. This was a piece of advice that I got before starting my first job from my father. And it was that small things become big things. And so to take the small things seriously, because most people don't. And what they miss is that those tiny little things are actually what create the texture of something really meaningful down the line. And so it's the example of early in your career, and as you're setting off, as you're working on bigger and bigger things, those tiny little inconsequential items that you took seriously, that you actually leaned into, that you actually learned, are the things that create the foundation for the really important things later on. And so if you haven't taken them seriously, and if you haven't dedicated real attention and energy to them, you're not going to be able to build the strong, stable structure on the other end of it. And you asked the question of how that applies so broadly. Now, I feel like I learned that in a career context and in a work context, where those tiny little things that you took seriously in those first few years allow you to thrive in the later years in your career. But now I see that principle in everything that I do in life. In relationships, the idea that taking those small interactions with someone really seriously, and how that applies and provides you with the foundation that allows you to navigate the really challenging things that may arise in your health, taking those small daily deposits seriously, because that's what allows you to get through whatever hardships you're going to face in your physical health. I just see that rule of taking the small things seriously apply across every single domain that matters in life.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Jordan Peterson's the first rule, which is make your bed. It's like the small things, setting the foundations of your home first before you try to solve the problems around the world. One of the other things that can kind of elaborate on that is, I feel like a lot of people that I meet in finance or private equity, they can do very difficult things really well. One of the things that I love just seeing your Instagram and all that stuff is you're a big proponent of just doing hard stuff, like 4 a.m. cold plunges. I still don't know how you do that early, running marathons, like lifting, just like the basics, but doing it on a consistent basis. How have you trained yourself to have that level of discipline of doing the hard things? Is that something that you've always had, or is that something that you've developed through sports or private equity?
I think it's developed through a number of things over the course of your life. But when I think back on my childhood, I think a lot of these things were learned from my father, and not through anything that he explicitly taught, importantly, but through observing and absorbing the things that I felt like he lived by. And today, I have a young son, And one of the things I think about is that the single greatest gift that I can give my son is to grow up in a house where he understands the value of delayed gratification and the importance of doing the hard thing now that creates the beautiful thing later and the meaningful thing later. That's the real generational wealth that we're after in life, is passing that down. Because if you understand that, you can really make anything else work in your world. And I felt like I absorbed that from seeing my father. I felt like that was the greatest gift that he taught me, was that I knew that he never avoided a hard conversation with my mom or with a family member. I knew that if he wanted to achieve something that mattered to him, he was going to work very hard towards it, whatever it was. I knew that he was going to prioritize my sister and I, even if it meant sacrificing and staying up late or getting less sleep in whatever the context was. And so I feel like that was just something that kind of got hardwired into me from a young age. So when I went after whatever my earliest pursuits were, originally it was baseball, that was the way that I pursued it. Was I'm not going to be the most talented, I'm not going to be the most gifted at whatever this thing is, but you're probably not going to be able to consistently outwork me at this thing. And I say consistently as the point of emphasis there, because there's plenty of people that will outwork me on any given day. I still truly believe this, by the way, that like there's tons of people that are willing to do an all-nighter more than me and like will go and do that, or maybe for a week they'll do it, or maybe for a month. But I would really be hard pressed to find someone who has showed up as consistently as I have on the endeavors that I care about over the last 10 plus years. And to me, that's what life really is. Because when you think about the most important things that you're trying to build in your life, whether it's your financial or career success, whether it's your relationships, whether it's your health, all of those things are just about compounding. And compounding is just returns to the power of time. And everyone focuses on the returns piece, right? Everyone's like, how do I get slightly higher returns here? What really matters is the time that you actually stay in the game, the time that you're allowing that compounding to roll. And so I've always focused on that. It's like, how do I just stay in the game longer than other people, or longer than feels comfortable? And generally, that's by just showing up every single day. Even if you don't feel good, you still show up. Maybe it's a 2 out of 10 effort that day, but you still showed up, because anything above 0 compounds. So staying in the game for long periods of time, not allowing yourself to get knocked out of the game by doing the dumb thing, that to me is where all of the gold in life lies.
Yeah. And we talked about just before this as well, like 90% of podcasts have like 3, 4, 5 episodes. So that person could be the most motivated person, may have the best guests, stayed up all night editing the perfect podcast episode. But if after a month they don't have any episodes, like all of that work it doesn't have that compounding leverage that it would. I mean, how long have you been doing your newsletter for? It's been
3 years. May 2021, I started the newsletter, and I've written 2 newsletters every single week for 3 years without missing a single issue. So no Christmas, no holiday, like I sent it every single week, right? And what you said, I mean, everyone wants, so there's 2 points here. Excitement is perishable. And if you're relying on excitement, you're dead, because you need to be able to thrive when the excitement's gone. Like there's a saying in the marathon world that the real race starts at mile 20. You can be super adrenaline infused, excited for that first 20 miles. You're like, I'm running my marathon. I trained for this. So great. But the real race starts at mile 20 when it's no longer exciting. Yeah. You feel terrible at mile 20. And it's a 6-mile race. So it's like a 20-mile training run, and then it's a 6-mile race. And that same thing really applies to a lot of areas of life. It's like if you're trying to write a book, if you're trying to build a company, if you're trying to build the body you want, all of those things, the beginning is exciting. Anyone can be excited during that beginning. But how are you going to show up at mile 20? How are you going to be when it's no longer exciting?
Yeah, no, totally. I think Muhammad Ali also talks about how he starts counting when the sit-up starts hurting. That's kind of like a famous thing that he talks about.
So true. That's I haven't heard that. That's very good though.
Yeah. And we were also talking about, when you were in private equity, you had all the skills on the outside. You looked like you fit in. You probably could have continued to thrive, made partner at any private equity company you wanted. But on the inside, you just didn't feel like you belonged. Talk to me a little bit about that and what that conflicting pathway was for you, and ultimately like how you had the balls to actually go outside of a very prosperous industry and career that you had.
Yeah. Maybe this is something that other people out there can relate to. I would say that for the first 30 years of my life, many of the decisions that I made were grounded in a pretty deep-seated insecurity and a desire to feel impressive to others, a desire to get external affirmations that I was smart, or that I was successful, or that I was interesting. And unfortunately, that led to a lot of inner turmoil that I didn't allow anyone in the world to see. And even to this day, I haven't really talked about it all that publicly beyond a few people who know me really well, my wife being one of, a couple. And really that journey, those first 7 years of my career, was taking a job that had an unbelievable learning curve and thriving in that learning curve over a few years, the first few years of it, because I'm super motivated by growth. I love learning. I love that period of like when you're drinking out of a fire. It was so fun and engaging to me. An incredible group of people, but an industry where what you really need to care about is how to make money. Like that is what, at the end of the day, your job is to make money for your investors. And you get paid really well for it. And that's what you need to care about to do it really well. The people that thrive in that industry are economic animals. I remember hearing this really funny story about a very successful private equity founder investor who, when he was raising money for his debut fund, the LPs asked him, what kind of associates are you going to hire for your fund? And he said he wanted the type of people who would go to their grandmother's house, sit down on the couch, and be digging their hands in between the couch cushions looking for pennies to pick up. That was what he answered. And the LPs probably loved that, right? Like that is the best type of person.
Not even joking, right?
No,
Like,
not joking. Straight dead face.
Yeah.
And he raised a huge fund that has been very, very successful, by the way. But that's the type of person that thrives, right? It's an economic animal. And I knew by about year 4 that that was not me. My energy just wasn't aligned around that. I've always been someone that was very heart forward and someone that was very motivated by feeling like I was creating an impact, especially with younger people, but across the spectrum. And unfortunately, that ran counter to this deep-seated insecurity of needing to seem successful. And I was on a trajectory that was continuing to pat me on the back because I was making more and more money. And so on the outside looking in, you would have said, oh, this guy's killing it. He's winning the game. He's doing big things. But internally, everything was starting to fall apart. And, my most important relationships with my wife, with my parents, with my sister were really suffering. I wasn't seeing friends all that often because I wasn't present. I was very stressed all the time. My health was suffering. I was drinking way too much. All of these other areas of my life were kind of falling as it seemed on the surface like things were going great. And that's very tough. That's very isolating because it feels like a champagne problem. You're like, why are you complaining? Things are going really well in your life.
And who were you trying to prove that to? Was that your wife, your parents, your friends? Like, who were you trying to get validation from?
I was trying to get validation from everyone so that I could convince myself that I was impressive, right? Like that's the insecurity is you don't feel impressive. So you need tons of other people to tell you you're impressive so that you can suddenly wake up one day and be like, oh, maybe I actually am impressive. But that's an internal problem that you're trying to solve with something external. And fundamentally in life, that doesn't work. You can't solve something inside with some outside intervention. And so it's just a fallacy that you think you can, right? You think that the next achievement, the next mountaintop, the next bonus, the next promotion, you think that that's the thing that's going to lead to your fulfillment, that's going to lead to your contentment all of a sudden. But you never get there. It's a mirage. You get to the next thing and then you just look and you still feel miserable. And that was my life. And to be totally honest, I sort of felt like that was what my life was going to be, was that I was going to just continue to chase more and more financially, and that I was never going to find that lasting joy that I felt was possible. And unfortunately, it was manifesting in my relationship with my wife in a really sad way, which is we were really struggling to conceive. And we'd been trying for maybe about a year to have our first child, and had been unable to. And there's a lot of, people don't really talk about this a whole lot. For women, there's a feeling of shame that comes with it, that there's something wrong with you. For me, there was a massive burden of feeling like seeing my wife feel that way, that there was something wrong, when in hindsight, it was probably something wrong with me, my stress levels, the way I was feeling, that were impacting it. And fortunately, we decided to make a change. I quit my job. We left the West Coast to move back to be closer to our families, make this big life change, to adjust course. And within 2 weeks of making that change, my wife got pregnant.
Wow.
And I just remember that feeling for the first time in my life, that when your energy comes into alignment with the way that it's supposed to exist, everything falls into place as it should. And the feeling of relief and joy that I had with seeing my wife experience that, I will never forget that feeling of when I found out she was pregnant. It's still, I mean, the best moment of my life in a very real, visceral way.
Yeah. Wow. 2 weeks after. That's insane.
Crazy.
Just to go deeper on that. So you brushed over quitting your job, but based on, I would imagine, what you were making, and at this point you were looking at the financial security of your potential family, right? How did you make that decision? Because generally the more you make, the more of the golden handcuffs that you get, and it's harder and harder to leave for most people. Was it just so painful that the turmoils of the relationship, conflicts that you were dealing with at that moment, that it just made sense to abandon ship? Or did you have to have some sort of faith in taking something else? Like, what was kind of going through your mind?
You know, a lot of people will tell you that the worst thing in the world is being on a bad path. And I actually disagree. I think the worst thing in the world is being on a good path that isn't yours. What do I mean by that? A bad path, like a 2 out of 10 path, screams at you every single day that you have to make a change. It's so obvious. It's a terrible path. You have to make a change, and you will. A good path that isn't yours, like a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10, there's nothing in your life screaming at you to make a change. There's a whole lot of things that actually suggest you should stay. The financial security, the responsibilities you have, the people patting you on the back, all of these things. And by all means, my path was a good path. There are a lot of people that dream for that path that I was on. It just wasn't mine. And it happened that it was existing in a world that was 3,000 miles away from the people that I cared most deeply about, and my parents, getting closer to them, my parents, my sister, my wife's parents. And that was really the biggest impetus for making an abrupt change, was this realization that if we didn't adjust course, we were going to be living our entire lives so far away from the people that mattered most to us. I wouldn't say I had any sort of plan or strategy for how to make that kind of money or have that type of success in a different world. What I did know was that you can do anything for 2 years. And what I mean by that is, like, we often assume when we're making big changes that it's like a one-way door. Like, you walk through it and you can never walk back. And that's very rarely the case, right? Most decisions are a two-way door. Like, you walk through, and if you don't really like it, you can end up walking back and doing the same thing. And I hadn't gone to business school. And so the way I framed it in my mind was, we need to make this change for a lot of reasons for our life, our family, for my health, for my wife and my relationship, all of these reasons impacting my own mental health. And if I go try something else for 2 years and it totally fails, that was my MBA. Like, right? I got a real world MBA trying to build something on my own. And then I can go back and get a job. And I can go to a private equity fund, or I can go to a consulting firm. Like, I have marketable skills at this point. I've worked for 7 years, right? I've built something in that time. And that was very comforting to me and reassuring. And it's a mental model that I think is useful for a lot of other people out there that are feeling that way, that they're on a good path. It's not theirs. What can they do? You can make a change. Give it 2 years, give it a year and a half, give it a year, and see what happens. And you can always walk back through that door. You might not be able to go back to the same firm, but something like it. And that, to me, like, that was sort of the key mindset shift that really led to making that change.
Yeah, when you said family, it reminds me, one of my favorite books is The Shortness of Life by Seneca. And it also reminds me of this blog post by Tim Urban. Yes.
He's a good friend, yeah.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. And I love that. I forgot, is it called The Long Tail?
Tail End.
Tail End.
Yeah, it's in my book, actually.
And he talks about, I don't know if he says this exactly, but there was something to the tune of, by the time that you're 18, you've seen and spent about 90% of the time you'll ever spend with your parents, which is like, that was a mind blower for me. And you have this thing called time billionaire. Explain what that is for people and how this all kind of confines.
Yeah. So the time billionaire was this idea that was originally proposed by an investor named Graham Duncan, who I spoke to for my book, actually. He, after interviewing hundreds of young people for his firm, came to this realization that all of them seem to want to become a billionaire, but very few are relating to themselves in the way that they have an abundance of time in their life. They literally have, at age 20, you literally have like 2 billion seconds left in your life. A billion seconds is about 30 years. And yet you're not relating to yourself in that way. You're not appreciating the value of that asset. The question that I always like to bring this to life is like, would you trade lives with Warren Buffett? You would not. He has $130 billion in his bank account, but you wouldn't trade the amount of money he has for the amount of time you have. Your time that you have left is worth more than $130 billion to you. Similarly, he would trade every single dollar he has to be in your shoes, to have the amount of time that you have left on this planet. And so that's a really important realization of the actual tangible value that you have in the form of this time in your life. And I talk about it and write about it in the book, just this idea that relating to the fact of what Tim brought up, Tim Urban, on the amount of time you have left with the people you care about. You can create time. People think like, oh, time is fixed, you're just living through it, right? I'll give you an example. When we made the decision to move back home, I had done the math that if we didn't make a change, I was going to see my dad 15 more times before he died. We were seeing him once a year. He was about 65 at the time, life expectancy of 80, say. Yeah. I was going to see him 15 more times before he died. We moved back to the East Coast. That number, 15, is now in the hundreds. We see them almost every week, every other week. And that is quite literally creating time. We created time with the people that we care about most by making a decision, by taking an action. And so when you think about your time, thinking about it in the context of something that you can actually manipulate and use in the right ways by taking the right actions is a really empowering thought, but one that most people never think about.
Yeah. I mean, that's why the book is called The 5 Types of Wealth, right? People most just based on society, they think it's capital. They think it's the money in your bank account, but time is probably one of the most significant ones that most people they don't realize until they're a little bit older. Yeah. Like people when they're 20, they don't think about it. It's just what they're missing is the bank account money. It's not the time money.
Yeah, and the problem is you don't think about time right up until the point when it's the only thing you think about, which is right at the end. And so it goes from being this thing that you think about none to being the thing that you think about the absolute most, but only once it's too late. And so the idea is like, can you shift that curve? Can you think about time earlier on? Think more deliberately about how you're spending your time, who you're spending it with, what you're allocating it towards, when you should trade it and when you shouldn't. I'll give you an example. I have a young son. There is a 10-year window when you are your child's favorite person in the entire world. 10 years. That's it. And then it's gone. Then they have most important people in different areas. They have friends, they have best friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses, and you never occupy that same role that you did during that 10-year window. That also just so happens to be the time period when you tend to be hustling the most and chasing all of the financial opportunities in the world. But if you blink and that moment has passed, was that a trade that you really wanted to make during that time period? I think about that every single day now because I am filled with an abundance of new opportunities, right? People come to me every day with new opportunities, but you cannot pay me enough money to give up that time with my son that I have. He's 2.5 years old. You cannot, if you came and offered me $100 million to work for the next 5 years and tell me that I need to travel 300 days a year and work 80 hours a week for the next 5-10 years, I would say absolutely not. It wouldn't even be a consideration for me.
Wow. Do you know how many
$1 billion? Like there's not an amount of money you could give me because it would be literally giving up something that I'm never going to get back. I can't recreate my son at 10 years old. And by the way, like I'm probably going to have his life be harder if he has $1 billion. We have plenty of money. We're totally fine and comfortable. Getting to $1 billion, like I actually know more screwed up billionaire kids than good ones. And so I think that more people need to spend time. And the book is in part a call to action around that. Really think about your time, what it means, and how you value it. Because if you don't, society will just choose for you.
Yeah. It's one of those hard things to wrap your head around because if you look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's hard to look from one rung to another. It's hard to like skip all the way to self-actualization if you're paying the bills, barely just scraping by. So it's hard to look above, and I get where people are coming from because I've certainly been there, and I'm sure you have as well, right? It's a tough place to be in when you're just barely scraping by and you can look towards the basic needs that you have above you.
And I don't think it's important. By the way, the book is not at all saying that money doesn't matter. And it's a very important point. Money very much does matter, especially up to that certain level where your basic needs, where you're like, even your not so basic needs, like basic pleasures are met. Money significantly reduces stress and increases happiness up to that level. All of the research shows that. What the research also shows, though, is that above that level, whatever it might be, which differs depending on where you are, or the numbers, geography, etc. Above that level, if you are miserable above that level, more money is not going to make you less miserable. And if you're happy above that level, more money is not going to make you more or less happy. So the point is that you should focus on building financial wealth up till that point. And then you should be really focused on how all of them interact together, the different types of wealth, because the other things are what's going to bring you true lasting enjoyment and fulfillment. It's time, it's purpose, it's people, it's health. Those are the things that are actually bringing you that lasting contentment and joy. It's not more money once you get above that level.
Yeah. What is that number? From
it depends. I mean, some of the research will say $200,000 per year. Some of the research will say $80,000 per year. The problem is you can't generalize because if you're, a family of 4 living in New York City, that number is very different than, a single individual living in Missouri. Or, if you go internationally, it's very different. So I've always found like those numbers, they're inherently averages that you're just averaging across a group. The point is that it's sort of the level of enoughness where you have like a reasonable number of your baseline needs are met plus some reasonable amount of pleasures. I personally define it as the level where like you can take 2 vacations a year and you have all of your basic needs met.
Sure. So going back to your story, when you were thinking about this context of what is enough money, right? When you're thinking about which mountain to climb, when you were thinking about and analyzing your skill sets, your experience, what are market opportunities, there's a lot of people that maybe have a job now and they are trying to pursue a business or whatever it might be. How did you come to analyzing them and assessing what those opportunities would be? Because I'm sure you had probably 5,000 different opportunities and pathways that you could go to. And should people choose passion first and lean with that? Or as we just talked about, should they at least try to maybe go for some money first and get to a point where they can meet those basic needs?
So there's a couple things here. First off, I still have no idea what passion means. Everyone tells you when you're early in your life to like, oh, follow your passion, follow your passion. I have no clue what I'm passionate about. And there's been a lot of stuff that I hated and then became passionate about once I got good at it.
Yeah.
I find it much more helpful to follow your energy because I know what I'm pulled towards. I know what makes me feel good after I do it. And those things you tend to become highly competent at, and you tend to create a lot of value around the things that your energy is pulling you towards. The other thing I would say here is building financial wealth in your 20s and early 30s is a very, very net positive activity and endeavor for the rest of your life. To go back to the equation from earlier, returns to the power of time. That time lever is significantly larger when you do it in your 20s and 30s than if you did it in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, because you just have more years for that to compound. And so if you can create a base of financial security during your 20s and 30s, you can actually be reasonably confident and comfortable in your financial position for the rest of your life. That means that it's actually a great time to really put your head down and have that be one of your priorities during those early years. And that's an important point. It's an important time to be going and building that. But the advice that I would give to anybody, regardless of what stage you are in your journey, is to follow your energy, because the things that you are pulled towards are the things where you will be able to naturally create lasting, durable value. Those are the things where you'll be able to stay in the game long enough to compound and to stack skills and to build something of meaning.
How did you get Tim Cook as your mentor?
So I met Tim in 2014 when I first started working at the firm, my first job. So the reason was I'd played baseball in college. I was very into lifting and training, and I knew I was taking this job where I was going to work, 80, 100 hours a week. And I knew the only way that I would be able to continue my workout habit was if I went early in the morning before work started, because I knew, like, in finance, you're prone to working really late at night. It wasn't going to work out to go in any other time. So what that meant was I had to get to the gym at 4:45 in the morning and get a workout in order to be in the office by about 6:30 or so to start my work day. I started going to the Equinox Palo Alto because my office was in Palo Alto, and I would show up at 4:45. Doors would technically open at 5, although they would normally open them for this small group of people a little early. That group of people was 6 to 8 people that would literally show up every single day without fail. I was one of them. As it turns out, Tim was another one of them. He was recently appointed as the CEO of Apple at that time in 2014. I didn't know who he was.
Visually, nothing.
Nothing.
Wow.
I mean, I didn't work in tech. I hadn't studied, I hadn't done any tech stuff in college. I was playing baseball. I just didn't know who he was. So I talked to this guy, just the way I talked to any of the other guys at the gym for probably 6 months. Before one day someone came up to me and was like, "Do you know who that person is that you were just chatting with in the locker room?" I was like, "No, I have no idea." They were
Some old guy.
like, "Tim Cook, that's the CEO of Apple." Yeah. And he's super fit. Like all the people that showed up at that time in the morning, they were super fit. And by the way, among the other 6 or 8 people that were there, it was one of the founders of General Catalyst, Hemant Taneja, a bunch of crazy successful people, because you're self-selecting for the type of people that are showing up at a really nice gym in a fancy area at 4:45 in the morning. Probably not losers. And, so then after I figured that out, I asked him if he'd be willing to get breakfast and chat about career stuff, just because I was early in my life. And fortunately, he said yes. And it was the start of what has been an incredible relationship and friendship. And he was gracious enough to read and write a blurb for this book, which was incredible. And he's just been an incredible force for good in my life. He was a big part of the reason I had confidence to make a change and try my own thing, do something different. His story is a good example of that. I was mentioning to you earlier, one of the things I love about people is like a pattern disrupt. When someone does something that doesn't make sense. And Tim's story of landing at Apple is a perfect example of a pattern disrupt that caught Steve Jobs' eye.
Oh, I didn't even know this.
So Tim was working at IBM. He was rising through the ranks in their management track, right? He was on a great career track, the good path, right? Things were going really well.
Safe.
And his resume popped up in a search for either a COO or a VP of Ops at Apple. And Steve saw it and was like, oh, long time IBM guy. Nope, put it to the bottom, whatever. 6 months later, they were still running the same search, and he sees Tim's resume again. And this time, Tim has left IBM and taken a job at Compaq, this like weird little computer startup.
Yeah.
And Steve saw it and stopped. Was like, now this is weird. It's a guy who's on this clear good path, this trajectory that no one leaves. And yet he's left to go to this weird little startup. Maybe this guy's actually more unique and interesting than I thought. Maybe we should talk to him. And that was what sparked the initial conversation that led to obviously what has been his career and his life's work at Apple. And so I think a lot about that is like the willingness to become a pattern break and to become a pattern disrupt is very scary. And one of the things that empowers you to do it is one person encouraging you and telling you that you can do that you can be that.
Just giving you permission.
Yeah.
To think bigger, to take the risks. Yeah.
And it's funny because we spend a lot of our lives looking for permission from someone else. I think about that a lot these days when I talk to young people. I'm like, you sound like you're waiting for permission for someone to give you permission to tap yourself into the game and to go in and do the thing. And at the end of the day, you don't need permission from anyone else. You can tap yourself in. You can come over and say, hey, Sahil, like go do the thing and go do it. But that's easier said than done. Now I know that, and I can tap myself in and I can come and say like, sure, why can't I write a book, right? You feel imposter syndrome around something and you're like, well, who am I to write a book? I mean, I'm not an author. I'm just a newsletter writer. It's like, well, everyone's not an author until they write their first book. I'm just going to tap myself into that.
Sure.
But at the moment when you don't have that confidence to do, having one person that's willing to come over and give you that, hand that confidence to you, is really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, actually, imposter syndrome is a great topic to talk about. I struggle with that a lot. And part of the reason is, I don't know if your parents were very like traditional and they wanted to take you on a traditional path or not. Mine definitely was, like, for sure. It's like, it's either you're a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure, right? This is the traditional Asian
you're talking to a guy with an Indian mother.
True.
So yes.
Fair enough.
My mom still to this day asks me if I'm sure I don't want to be a doctor.
It's cool.
I'm like, Mom, I'm 33 years old. I don't know.
No, I feel you.
Yeah.
And the biggest realization that I had going through this was that whenever I would celebrate these small wins in business and entrepreneurship, and I would go to my parents, or specifically my mom with that, she would tell me exactly what your mom would say as well, which is she would tell me to go back to school, or she would not really get it. So the people closest to me trying to have explanations and a celebration of what I've accomplished in like the most important thing in my life at that time weren't understanding what I was doing. So it was almost like we were speaking a different language. And I realized that because of that, I didn't get the validation. So there was a lot of imposter syndrome that I had to go through of doing the podcast, or even as the business became more successful, it's like, oh, do I deserve, this big business or this revenue amount? I've never seen this. My parents never made this much. It's still probably something that I go through. But how did you overcome that? Because you have a similar family background. Is it just that you weren't affected by as much?
No, it certainly wasn't that. I'm deeply affected. And I continue to feel imposter syndrome on a daily basis. I would say I simply reframed imposter syndrome as a tax on progress, meaning you cannot make incredible progress in life without feeling like an imposter, because by definition, to make progress, you are encountering and bumping up against things that are beyond or on the border of your current level of competency. You are going and doing something that you haven't done before. And everyone is an imposter if they're doing that. Yeah. I have not written a book before. I am an imposter at book writing until I've written my first book, until you write a bestseller. Then all of a sudden, you're no longer an imposter. Jeff Bezos was an imposter at starting an online bookstore until he started an online bookstore. He was an investor. That mindset shift has been very powerful for me. It's just to realize that imposter syndrome can be a good thing. Because it means that you are taking on things that scare you. It means that you are doing things that make you feel uncomfortable, which in my own experience across every domain I've encountered, whenever I've felt a level of discomfort or fear at the thing that I was going after, I was on the right track.
Yeah. And I guess this is a similar note, but this idea of limiting beliefs is kind of correlated to that. Because you think that you've accomplished or you've kind of defeated limiting belief once you have some level of success. But to hit that next level or to be doing it in an industry that you're not familiar with, you're all of a sudden, you have these kind of glass ceilings like, oh, can I hit the New York Times bestsellers if you're selling a book? Can you be the #1 podcast? It's like, oh, I can't compete with these guys. I don't have enough experience, whatever it might be that you're telling yourself through. How do you go through that? How do you go through areas that you're not, let's say your book right now, or a podcast or your newsletter, as you reach new levels of success, do you have those glass ceilings that you're constantly trying to overcome? And how do you shift your inner voice to be able to get through that?
Yeah, I think of these as like the stories you tell yourself. And you have these original stories that live within you that are very hard to crack. So oftentimes the thing holding you back is not the sheer difficulty of achieving something, but rather the ease of continuing to tell yourself those stories that you can't achieve it. And an example from my own life is that I spent most of my life telling myself I wasn't smart. My older sister, very high achieving, academically oriented, all the best grades, all of the things that my academically inclined parents wanted. And early on, I convinced myself that she was the smart one and I was the athletic one. I wasn't smart. And that story that I told myself was something that I told myself through into age 30. I mean, it made no sense. I started telling myself that at age 12. It's not true, first off, but it doesn't matter. I told myself that. And so over and over again, every time I encountered something that would have forced me to run in conflict to that story, I retreated to the safety of that story. Like, oh, I'm not going to do that hard thing, or I'm not going to try, or I'm not going to study for this test because I don't want to run into conflict with this story that I know about myself. Forcing yourself to question actively those stories that you tell yourself on a regular basis is how you get through that. Question, is it true or is it just complete bullshit? And it's uncomfortable because oftentimes you've told yourself that story about who you are for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And you're asking yourself to confront that story. You're asking yourself to push back against what you have firmly believed about yourself for so long. But one of the things that I run into even now is sometimes you don't give 100% effort on something because you're afraid of what will happen if you do and still fail.
Oh my God, dude, I can 100% relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that
it's like it's a form of self-protection that turns into self-rejection.
Yeah.
You're self-rejecting by self-protecting.
Even with a relationship, it's like, oh, I didn't like that girl that much. You know, you're almost protecting yourself.
You don't want to open yourself up because you know that you will have to confront true failure if you gave your 100% effort and it doesn't work out. And that is so scary. And I find myself, like, as recently as a couple of weeks ago, we were doing an event and I hadn't wanted to post it on all the different platforms. And I was like, why am I not just posting? Like, we should do the event. We're doing a big event. And I realized it was like, I'm afraid, if I'm being totally honest, look at myself in the mirror, I'm afraid of what happens to my ego and to who I think I am and to what I think this platform is if I post it everywhere, do everything, and like 10 people show up. I'm afraid. And so I'm much happier not doing that. And then if 10 people show up, I can be like, well, I didn't really talk about it, whatever. Like, you know, oh, if I had, people would have shown, right? You give yourself the out. And that is such an important thing to be able to confront.
Yeah.
It's like, where am I self-rejecting by self-protecting?
Yeah, we're our worst enemy so often. We just got to get the fuck out of the way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's, I mean, it goes back to the original idea that we were talking about. Like, you can't change the world until you change yourself. And you sweep your doorstep first before you try to clean up the world.
Yeah. What helps me often is Charlie Munger talks about one of the mental frameworks that he has is inverting everything that you can. And oftentimes we think about what are the top 3 things we need to do to succeed or to impress this person or to get ahead of your career. But oftentimes it's thinking about the opposite, which is what are the things that are going to make this business a failure? What are the things that are going to leave a bad impression of this person? What are the things that you should not be doing to fail in your everyday life, in your relationships? And it actually takes that pressure off because there's always a bigger to-do list, but not to-do list is consistent, and it's something you can just consistently work on. And I think you have this thing about not setting big goals, so I'll explain that a little bit for people.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, by the way. And inversion is an incredible principle to adopt in your life. Like the quote is, all I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I'll never go there. Yeah. I've always loved that. Yeah, no, I think, when it comes to goals, I have just found in my own experience that big, ambitious goals are almost a lose-lose proposition in that if you achieve them, you get there and immediately reset to some new height and they don't provide the lasting joy you thought, or you miss them and you feel like a failure. And the balancing act I try to play now is to get the kind of direction, like the compass that you can get from a big goal without allowing that to influence my daily actions. Like, how can I use the plus side of a big goal, which is like, let me set the trajectory in the right direction, but then really focus in on micro goals along the way, the little things that I'm really trying to achieve. What does a win this week look like for me, rather than worrying about the marathon goal that's 6 months away, 9 months away, 12 months away. And if you can center your focus there, if you can really hone in on the 100 days, right? Like, if I repeat today for the next 100 days, will I be better off or worse off than I am? You should be able to answer that question, actually. Like, go through an average Tuesday. If I repeat this day 100 times in a row, will I be better off or worse off? And if the answer is better off, you're headed in the right direction. You're doing the daily actions that are pushing you and rowing your boat in the right direction. If not, you need to adjust. There's something that needs to make a change. But we spend all of this time and energy around 5-year plans, 10-year plans, all of these big things. The reality is the most interesting opportunities in life are inherently nonlinear and asymmetric. You cannot plan for them. If you had asked me 5 years ago to write out a list of 100 places where I might be in 5 years, not a single one of them would have been correct. Not a single one of those 100 5-year plans would have been right, because the thing that I ended up doing was the asymmetric nonlinear path that was the most interesting one. So what's the point? Me sitting here today and trying to plan 5 years in the future. It doesn't make any sense. What I should do is focus on today. Focus on the next 100 days. What can I be doing that is going to leave me better off at the end of this 100 days than presently?
Yeah, it reminds me of what Tim Ferriss says, why he doesn't set 5 or 10-year goals, because he talks about that 5-year future version of myself is probably going to think bigger. It's probably going to have more skills, more experience. It's not going to have the glass ceilings that is currently present. So there's no point making a 10-year goal, because in a year from now, I'm probably going to be at a different place in my life where I'm going to have different goals, bigger goals. So it's kind of irrelevant thinking too much into the future. You want a direction, like you said, of where you want to go. But I think so often people don't analyze their everyday routines. Like you mentioned, like how are you actually spending your day, your week? And is that aligned to the future that you actually want? Is that going to get you there?
Yeah, I mean, everyone will like throw out these big ambitions and goals, and you're like, okay, well, what are you doing today? How does the structure of your day today align with where you're trying to go? And it's like completely different, right? Like I'm mentoring this young man right now, and he's like, well, I want to make $1 million a year. I want to do this. I want to do that. I'm like, all right, well, what did you do today? And he's like sketching out his day. He's like, nah, I kind of, not much, not this. I'm like, well, you're not going to get there, right? Like, it's just, that makes no sense. You can't do nothing and then just wake up one day when you're 30 making $1 million. That's not how it works. You need to structure your day. You need to have actions taken every day that are building a skill, that's building something that is going to compound to lead to you creating enough value that you're able to make that much money, if that's your central goal and the primary thing you're going after. So it's very easy to like say these things, but it's very hard to actually take the actions on a daily basis that will lead to these things.
It's funny how that gets inverted as you get more successful, as you have more leverage, because so oftentimes our schedule is so packed. One of the things I heard, do you know Jeff Weiner? He was the CEO of LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah.
So he did this intentionally. Every day he would have an hour and a half, 2-hour block on his calendar, and it just says nothing. It's a blank time. And the idea is that it just allows him to allow his mind to just kind of wander. So he would go for walks, or he would meditate, he would just start journaling. And that free time is where he gets all of his great ideas. Because for him, it's not about making every single minute count in terms of productivity. He has so much leverage in terms of his employees. And even with AI, and one person, as long as they know exactly what direction and how to use that leverage, they can really make a lot of impact with it. So I found that interesting, like just having like a blank time on your calendar.
Yeah, I write about that in the book, in the mental wealth section. One of the pillars of mental wealth that I talk about is space. And the whole idea is like creating that space in your life to think. And whether that's meditation, whether that's walks, whether that's a mindfulness practice, whether that's spirituality, connecting with God, if that's something you believe in, whatever it is, it's creating that space in your life so that you're not constantly going from stimulus to response. It's like Viktor Frankl talks about space between stimulus and response is where your power lies. And there's a lot of power to be found in creating that space in your life. I don't think everyone can create 90 minutes of space in their life, but can you create 5? Can you create 10 minutes of space during the course of the day? It can have a meaningful impact.
I want to shift to relationships a little bit and just more life stuff. You said in the book, there was a Harvard study of adult development that came out, and it was a very impactful study. I think you mentioned something around like it was the most impactful study in the last 100 years. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think this is the single most impactful study of the last 100 years. It is called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It was a study that originally was started with a group of Harvard sophomore students, and it was merged with a study of a group of inner city youth in Boston. And basically, they tracked 1,300 participants over the course of 80 plus years. So the original participants and then their kids and spouses and all of these things over the course of 80 plus years. And it was tracking life and prospering and how people felt and their health and all of these different things over super, super long period of time to try to understand what led to people living a good life. And the most interesting finding was that the single greatest predictor of health, physical health at age 80 was not your cholesterol or your blood pressure or any of these things earlier in life. It was your relationship satisfaction at age 50. So how you felt about your relationships at age 50 was the single greatest predictor of your health at age 80. What a powerful insight that is for the things that we need to focus on. Your relationships literally create your life. The people you surround yourself with have an impact not only on your mental health and all of these areas of your life, but on your physical health, on how you feel. And now we have a growing body of research that supports this. Loneliness and the loneliness epidemic that we find ourselves in literally kills. It leads to dementia. It leads to higher all-cause mortality. All of these terrible things are happening as a result of loneliness. And this study was really one of the first ones that brought that to the fore, that really pointed out the importance of our relationships in determining our lives.
There were some charts as well, right, that you brought up in terms of how our life progresses over time. I know we can't like show the visual parts of that.
Put them in the show notes.
Yeah,
probably,
you could have explained that a little bit.
Yeah, these were charts of how you spend your time over the course of your life. And it was from the American Time Use Survey, which is a really comprehensive data set. And basically it was showing who you spend your time with across different years. And the most important and salient point that it brings to the fore is this idea that there are short windows of time when someone really occupies a central role within your world. And the two most pressing examples in my mind were children have this very short window when they exist in your world, and your parents, your family, that is vast majority early in life. And the insight and the piece that's empowering is what I said earlier, which is you can actually bend those curves. Those are averages, but you can take actions that change that. You can take advantage of the part of the curve when you exist in it, but you can also make changes, live closer to the people you care about most, make sure that you keep up with those people, send the text when you think about them, do those tiny little things that actually bend those curves in your favor.
Dude, there's so many people that write self-help stuff, but when you actually see their actions, they don't actually walk the walk. Seems like you're walking the walk. I mean, you talked about the two biggest things that were most important in that chart, and you're doing it, and you've made those changes. What's something that you're working on now? Like, what's something that is a constant work of progress for you that you're just constantly trying to improve in yourself, in your relationship, in your business? Like, what's that for you?
I would say all of these things are a work in progress. I mean, I certainly feel like I'm walking the walk. I have always felt like the only way to share things over a long period of time is for it to be authentic and real, and for it to be not something I talk about, but something I am actually about. So if I talk about the importance of discipline and showing up daily, then the mornings when I don't feel like getting in the cold plunge, you're still going to see me getting in the cold plunge. You're still going to see me going out for the run or doing those things. Similarly, if I talk about relationships, I want to show up for those people and really be present. My son's life, my wife's, my parents, all of these things. I struggle daily with all of them, but that is natural. That's what the journey is. We all struggle with these things and balancing them and balancing your ambitions against these time windows that you need to be present during, and balancing the travel against the desire to be home. I would say the biggest thing that I wrestle with today, which, the entrepreneurs out there can probably understand, is this feeling of isolation that is often created by entrepreneurship, especially in the context of wanting to be the person that sets the tone and energy for the teams you're on. I often don't want to vocalize things that I feel like aren't working or challenging or things I'm stressed about to the people on my teams, whether that's business or whether that's my life, personal life, because I feel a responsibility to carry that load, to be the one that sets the tone and the energy of excitement and inspiration, and put it on myself to figure those things out. And I know that I'm going to. But that creates a lot of isolation at times, where you feel like you can be in things on your own. And so finding the communities of people that maybe aren't necessarily tied directly to the things you're working on, but who can resonate and understand that, is something that I'm still really working on.
What are some of the solutions for that?
I think
therapy?
peer groups help. No, I think having people who are really in it really helps. I've never gone to therapy. I like the incentives of a peer group a lot more than the incentives of therapy.
Why is that?
I'm a big believer in incentives from an economic background. And when the incentives that someone has are to keep you coming back, rather than to address and solve the problem, I become inherently skeptical. And that applies to a lot of things of life for me, but like I'm inherently skeptical of the healthcare system at times. And I have always wrestled with that when it comes to therapy, is are my incentives aligned with this individual that I'm working with, versus a peer group where there's no financial gain for any of us involved. We're simply there for the betterment of each other and for supporting each other, for being vulnerable, for being open in that way. That is not to say that I don't see the immense value in therapy for a whole lot of people, and have many family members who have benefited from it tremendously, including my closest family members in many cases. But I have never ventured into it.
Yeah, no, I haven't either. Dude, you're very like unique and novel thinker, very original in terms of how you approach things. And you even spotted out, you talked about, I don't know if you want to say it, but like the girl that was doing stand-up comedy, it was just you're spotting those things. It's kind of wired into you. But I'm curious, like, are there questions that you come back to when you're trying to make a big decision in your life? Whether it's like a mental framework or something that can kind of reset your frame, limitation. Like, for example, like one of the questions I like to ask is one that Peter Thiel talks about, which is, how can you accomplish your 10-year goal in 6 months? Mm-hmm. And it's like a ridiculous saying, right? To think about how you can accomplish your 10-year goal in 6 months. But what he explains is that it's not really important what the answer is, but the whole idea is that it breaks you out of your frame, and it just makes you realize like you shouldn't even be on this boat. Like you should be on a completely different boat if you want to get there. What's something like that for you? Like, what's a question that you come back to, whether it's from you or just someone else?
Yeah. I've always liked the Mark Twain quote. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And I often ask myself that, like, what do I know for sure that just ain't so? Like, what is the thing that I am default certain of that may just not be true?
Yeah.
That's one that I really like asking myself regularly, because it's a reminder that you need to change your mind on things. And sometimes the things that you are most certain of are actually the most provably false. And those are the things where you get into a lot of trouble. So that has definitely been one for me that I try to ask regularly.
Like figuring out your blind spots.
Yeah, what are those blind spots? The other one is, what is the real price of this thing that I'm going after, that I want in life? I often say that there's two prices on something. There's the list price that you can see, and then there's the real price that you can't. The list price is, the kind of hard work that you need to put in to achieve the thing that you think you want in life. And that's very clear and obvious. But the real price is all of the other things that you're going to need to give up and sacrifice to achieve that. And that's less obvious and often not contemplated until you've given it up and paid it. And oftentimes I'm willing to pay the list price, but not the real price. So, John D. Rockefeller had to work 100-hour weeks for a long period of time to build the empire that he built. He also had to sacrifice a lot of relationships with his partner, with his children, grandchildren, etc. That's probably not a real price that I'm willing to pay to build a billion-dollar empire. It doesn't mean that it's wrong to pay it. Some people maybe want to and should. But I want to be very clear on what the real price is of the things that I'm going after before I go after them.
So you actively think about that.
I do.
Yeah.
Like if I'm going to go take on an opportunity, I want to think about if this is half as profitable as I think it can be and takes twice as long, do I still want to do it?
Because everything else is upside from there.
Yeah, it's like, we're inherently optimistic when we go into a new opportunity. We get excited about it. Yeah. So you're like, oh, this is going to be great. It's going to go perfectly according to plan and time, and I'm going to make this much money. You're like, okay, I really want to do it. Well, what if it takes twice as long and it's half as profitable as I think it's going to be? Do I still want to do it if I take that assumption? And then sometimes your calculus changes. And if the answer is no, then you probably should rethink it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very unique. That's very unique. For me, as we mentioned about finding this like traditional path and trying to figure out a way to create your own path has always been tricky for me. It's always something you have to fit in line. You have to be part of the collectivism. And it's only until I started my business or as I got into my adulthood that I'm now trying to do everything I possibly can to be different. You want to have a unique perspective in your business, in your personal branding, in your podcast. Like it's all about standing out and figuring out what's that unique weirdness. One of my favorite Nietzsche quotes is, "And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music."
So good.
And it makes me think about just being able to embrace their unique weirdness and craft a differentiation and stand out amongst the noisy world that we live in. How have you continued to cultivate that unique weirdness about yourself? I'm sure having a kid helps, but and how can people find that and to be able to stand out in this world?
I think it takes effort every single day to do that. Jeff Bezos wrote about this in his last Amazon shareholder letter. I quote it in the book. Just this idea that there is a price to pay for your distinctiveness, and you have to pay that price every single day because the default setting is equilibrium with your environment. Quite literally, your cells are trying to fall into equilibrium with your environment, and it takes a fight to stay alive because your equilibrium state is that you melt into the floor, you melt into your surroundings. All of your cells are fighting on an active basis. You have to do that same thing. You have to actually pay a price every single day for your distinctiveness. And that's not easy to do in a world that wants you to fit in and be the same, and where it feels much more comfortable to fit in and be the same. But chasing those things that feel different, that feel weird, that make you uncomfortable, I think that's the cost of entry.
Yeah, beautifully said, man. Well, I really appreciate this conversation. I'm grateful for you. I want to make sure people can check out the book. Tell people where they can find you, the book, anything else that is the best place to go.
Well, you can find the book anywhere books are sold now, fortunately. Amazon tends to be the easiest place for most people, but it'll be everywhere. You can find more information on it at the5typesofwealth.com. And then you can find more on me at sahilbloom.com. Part of the benefit of having a weird name, you can get your own domain.
That's it. Sahilbloom.com. Beautiful, man. Appreciate you.
Thank you.